To talk a bit more about that with me now, let's bring in Mark Fenster. You are a University of Florida law professor and the author of Conspiracy Theories, Secrecy, and Power in American Culture. Thank you for joining us. First of all, tell us a bit more about the biggest 9/11 conspiracy theories and how or if they were ever debunked.
Oh, well, so probably the two most prominent of them would alternatively say that the Bush administration and the American government were either completely involved, not only knew in advance, but were involved in the attack on the Twin Towers and on the Pentagon. And the lesser version of it would have it that the administration knew about the coming attacks but did nothing about it. As far as debunking goes, unlike with the JFK assassination, there was a government report that actually had a certain degree of credibility and sophistication in the way in which it investigated and the way in which it interacted with the public. And that had a greater effect on the general public belief and trust in government than the Warren Commission report following the Kennedy assassination. But as with all these things, it never completely killed off all conspiracy theories. It merely, for those who would be trusting of government anyway, it merely provided them with a reasonably authoritative account of what actually happened that day.
Well, then what about the others? I mean, why? I'm still confused by why American citizens would not trust what their own government was saying, particularly at a time then when the country felt so under attack.
Well, it's a long-standing tradition in the United States that dates back prior to the revolution to be distrustful of power. And that has a good side and a bad side. The good side of it is that is part of what led us to throw off the shackles of colonialism and has led to a certain degree of skepticism about all kinds of concentrations of power, whether within the federal government, whether within government generally, and whether within corporate interests and other sorts of civil society. But the bad side of it is this almost knee-jerk tendency, particularly for those who are opposed to the party or the individual within the White House, to disbelieve anything that gets said. So it's this sort of double-edged sword between having a real doubt about politics and about power, but also having no willingness to trust those who are telling us what is actually occurring.
Well, it's so fascinating now in the context of today. I mean, here now we have a president just almost after his immediate election. He himself was accusing the mainstream media, public offices of conspiracy himself. How do you explain that in the context of the conspiracy theories we've seen throughout American history?
Well, we are in an interesting period in the United States where the president himself was a fairly avowed conspiracy theorist, not himself someone who wrote conspiracy theories, but someone who would follow them and amplify them, and who has given permission, particularly for those within his own party and his own party's base of support, to believe in these things and circulate them. It's not completely unprecedented for government officials to espouse these things. We had the McCarthy era within the United States. We had all kinds of moments, particularly prior to the Civil War, where major political figures were espousing conspiracy theories, sometimes because there were conspiracy theories, where there were actual conspiracies to secede from the Union, for example, for the Civil War. But it's not completely unprecedented, but it is rather unusual to have no sort of barrier between the most paranoid and the most skeptical questions of power and those who are, in fact, holding the reins of power. It provides for a very strange dynamic within U.S. politics.
Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Mark Fenster there, an author and a University of Florida law professor. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us.